You can see the skies have cleared, and it's just a magnificent sight now. There's a real air of expectancy pervading right across the aerodrome. Some passengers have already been flying in the two-seaters a little earlier on, but this is the first start today of this remarkable silver Spitfire. And well, what an achievement it has been just to get this far. It'll be an even greater achievement to, of course, complete the tour. It's going to take some 4 months or so, lots of backup plans. But in the background, alongside the Spitfire, what we'll see for the next few minutes when they get airborne, a few formation flypasts. And that will be in tandem with the 3 two-seaters. And there is Matt just... pretty much, that's a comfortable looking feeling, being a pilot myself, when that means he's looking pretty happy. There's Dermot in the rear seat there. But we've got 3 well, equally iconic T9s with us today. We have, of course, the home-based Gilda in there. She's affectionately known in the hands of Jim Schofield. That's Sierra Mike 520. On the screen now, we've got 341. Of course, that's Parky's personal aircraft, or rather it's called Elizabeth, affectionately, by the Flying Legends team down at Headcorn. And nods coming all around now, which is fantastic. In the other aircraft, the Arco, the aircraft restoration company, the ex-Irish Air Corps aircraft, is Brian Smith. The passengers, as well as Dermot, of course, we've got several other notable names. We have Chris Granger here, as well as David Coulthard. And we've had the pleasure over the last couple of hours of hearing various stories and interviews with all of the guests here today. And also amongst, on the ground, left behind, sadly, Taron Egerton, of course, Elton John movie fame, and Rosamund Pike has also been here as well, all ambassadors for IWC. And I have to say, it's a tremendously professional effort, and a really, really grand farewell indeed here at the Boltby Academy at this remarkably historic aerodrome at Goodwood, of course, where Douglas Bader himself spent some considerable time. So known as Gertie, here's Matt now taxiing out in the silver Spitfire, a Mark 9, and you can see it finished and polished beautifully in aluminium with all the guns removed, really part of the demilitarizing of this aircraft, not just to, of course, highlight the timeless beauty of its design, but also it does make it a little less provocative than when adorned with camouflage paint. And as a result of that, both Steve Brooks and the rest of the Boltby team hoping to broaden the appeal and reach of the project and gain easier access to nations en route. And by presenting this aircraft in this beautiful bare metal state, they're aiming to highlight all of these wonderful features of not just the Spitfire, but drawing attention, of course, to the unique and famous shape of the airframe, but trying to do good as well. And it was interesting meeting some youngsters from the Fight for Peace campaign, part of the tie-up with IWC and Larius, the sports suppliers. And really wonderful to see so many friends of both companies here today to see this beautiful machine on its way. Of course, originally designed as a short-range, high-performance interceptor by R.J. Mitchell, an equally famous name. Sadly, he never saw the great success of the aircraft. He died of cancer in 1937, but his chief designer, Joe Smith, took over the reins and really developed this aircraft to its full potential. Over 20,000 of them were actually made in 24 different variants, and they served right through until 1956. It was shortly after that, actually, that the Battle of Britain Memorial Flights was formed at Royal Air Force Biggin Hill itself an equally famous fighter station. Matt now gingerly taxiing out. Of course, none of these warbird pilots ever like to hang around on the runways. Overheating is one of the big issues of the Merlin engine. A couple of variants flying here today, of course, the 66 and the 70. But all the aircraft beautifully maintained by clearly the owners, and a real pleasure to see so many of them here today. T9's not really a derivative of the Second World War period at all. There was a one-off modification of a Mark 5C by 261 Squadron, and a Mark 9 was converted for use as a trainer by the Soviets. But predominantly the two-seat Spitfire trainer was primarily a post-war program. All four of these a variety of either the high-level or low-level variant of the fighter Mark 9, and all coming out of the equally famous Castle Bromwich factory. Castle Bromwich, of course, built as a ghost factory after the bombing of the Supermarine Works down near Southampton. And I know an air of expectancy outside now as the pilots get ready to depart. They'll be running through their pre-flight checks, checking the T's and P's as we know it. Big difference between those three there is not just that obviously the Silver Spitfire is single seat, but it's also got a massive extra fuel tank behind the pilot, an extra 66 gallons. Interesting configuration, and of course that's all refurbished and made ready by John Romain and his team at the Aircraft Restoration Company across in Duxford. We had an interesting chat this morning about the effect that had on the C of G, and it does tend to oscillate a little bit, and Matt was explaining how gingerly he has to trim the aircraft out. The other factor, of course, as all pilots will be aware of, is that he'll be taking off at quite a heavy weight, but they've not actually landed yet with a full fuel load, and that could be tricky, which means adding somewhere in the region of 20 to 25 knots, and therefore quite a high speed to bring, if there were a technical issue once he gets airborne, he would have to bring that in at a very different speed to what most Spitfire pilots would be used to. He spent many hours training alongside Steve. Steve, of course, still relatively new to the Spitfire world, but I was again chatting to him just 20 minutes or so ago, and he's hugely excited, as everyone is here, for the success of this mission. They're a wonderful sight. It's extraordinary in many ways that we now have so many Spitfires flying back in UK, probably more than ever before since the end of the Second World War. And of course, there are also a huge number of Spitfire pilots. The Boltby Academy has trained many, but through training at the BBMF, of course, the Flying Legends team down at Headcorn, Biggin Hill, and so many other restorers over the years, has formed a tremendous pool of experienced Spitfire pilots. So we're on the roll now. It's certainly looking good. And they say, if it looks right, it flies right. And I think the whole history of the Spitfire underpins that age-old saying. Tail is up. Good airspeed, good rate of climb. You can hear him going past me outside the studio here at Goodwood. And there she goes. What a marvellous, marvellous sight. Matt, totally committed to flying Spitfires. He pinches himself, I think, every day. He first took to the skies whilst in the RAF CCF section at Exeter School, where he flew the Chipmunk. And I certainly wouldn't want to say too much whilst we have that wonderful sound of a Merlin engine. Matt and Steve formed the idyllic relationship here in generating the school. They've recently added a simulator, and it is exceptional, I can assure you, with the help of some of the engineers from nearby Tangmere, now able to give tuition before getting airborne, of course, but tuition available as a throughput, a standard training system. And all you need is the money. Talking of money, Matt, of course, did work for an investment bank himself after studying civil engineering at Newcastle University. But he didn't stick at that too long because he was committed to a full career in aviation. He went off to the USA, like so many other pilots, to get his professional licenses.